Chosen 1. This message is not framed as an announcement or a warning, and it is not intended to provoke urgency or emotional reaction. What is being described here is quieter, more precise, and more conclusive than the kind of turning points people often expect. Some chapters in life do not end through confrontation, explanations, or resolution conversations. They end because the structure that sustained them no longer exists. Many people anticipate that the closing of a difficult period will feel dramatic, validating, or emotionally intense. In reality, genuine closure is often marked by something far less noticeable: a sudden absence of strain. There is no surge of excitement, no external confirmation, and no sense of triumph. Instead, there is a calm realization that the weight you carried for a long time is no longer exerting pressure. The absence of resistance becomes the signal that something has ended. From a psychological perspective, this experience aligns with how the human nervous system processes prolonged stress. Repeated emotional strain does not resolve through optimism, effort, or endurance alone. The brain continues to hold stress patterns until it recognizes completion. Completion does not mean hope or belief that things will improve. It means that the lesson associated with the experience has been fully integrated. Only then does the nervous system close the loop. This explains why certain cycles persist long after people believe they have healed. Reflection, prayer, discussion, and personal growth efforts are important, but they do not always signal closure. As long as the underlying lesson remains partially misunderstood or misinterpreted, the system keeps the experience active. When integration finally occurs, the emotional charge dissipates without announcement. What many individuals interpret as confusion during this phase is often something else entirely. It is the body registering completion before the mind has adjusted to the change. The absence of anxiety can feel unfamiliar. The lack of anticipation or defensive thinking may feel almost unsettling. When the internal system no longer prepares for impact, it creates a sense of stillness that is easily mistaken for emptiness. One of the most overlooked indicators of genuine change is the disappearance of mental rehearsal. When a cycle is active, the mind repeatedly revisits conversations, justifications, and imagined explanations. When that cycle ends, those rehearsals stop. There is no longer a need to explain yourself to hypothetical audiences or prepare responses for situations that no longer hold authority. What makes this phase particularly disorienting is its anticlimactic nature. People often expect closure to feel heavy or emotional. Instead, it feels neutral. The absence of emotional intensity is not a lack of significance. It is evidence that the experience no longer has influence. When something loses emotional charge, it loses power. This is the point at which many people question whether the chapter is truly over. The lack of drama can feel invalidating. However, emotional neutrality is not indifference. It is integration. The experience has been processed to the extent that it no longer requires attention or reaction. The cycle did not end because endurance reached a heroic level. It ended because the lesson it carried reached completion. Pain does not remain to test strength indefinitely. It remains only as long as it continues to extract insight. Once there is nothing left to learn, repetition serves no function. Repeated experiences are often misunderstood as punishment or misfortune. In reality, repetition is feedback. Each recurrence highlights an element that has not yet been fully recognized. This may involve patterns of overextension, self-doubt, tolerance of ambiguity, or the tendency to prioritize hope over clarity. Until these elements are acknowledged, the experience remains relevant. Pain does not disengage simply because it becomes exhausting. Fatigue alone does not signal readiness. What ends repetition is accurate interpretation. When responsibility shifts from external causes to internal awareness, the system adjusts. This shift does not involve self-blame, but self-recognition. Once the core lesson is understood, the experience loses legitimacy. There is no negotiation phase, no gradual fade out. The pattern simply stops reappearing. This is why genuine closure feels different from forced detachment. There is no effort required to maintain distance. Certainty replaces vigilance. Another key indicator of completion is the absence of anxiety about recurrence. When cycles end prematurely, people often remain alert for signs of return. When a cycle ends through integration, then anticipation disappears. There is an internal certainty that does not require reassurance. At this stage, the same form of pain cannot function in the same way. This is not because circumstances become easier, but because the internal conditions that allowed that pain to take hold have changed. Fear, hesitation, and self-doubt are not weaknesses. They are learning states. Once they evolve, the experiences that relied on them lose access. This change often becomes apparent when familiar situations no longer provoke familiar reactions. Scenarios that once caused emotional escalation now register as distant or irrelevant. The individual observes rather than absorbs. The system that once allowed emotional disruption has recalibrated. This recalibration creates an observable divergence between individuals. Some remain engaged in recurring struggles, while others move through similar environments unaffected. This difference is not due to superiority or avoidance. It reflects internal change. When the internal framework changes, the same external input produces a different outcome. What prevents repetition is not resistance, but incompatibility. Experiences require matching internal conditions to take hold. When those conditions no longer exist, the experience cannot attach itself. This is not numbness or detachment. It is structural change. Authority over emotional responses often appears external, but it is maintained internally. Words, actions, and circumstances only exert influence when permission is granted at an internal level. That permission is rarely conscious. It is embedded in fear, guilt, loyalty, or hope. At some point, that permission is withdrawn. This may happen gradually or through a series of realizations. Once withdrawn, the authority others once held becomes symbolic rather than functional. Attempts to provoke response no longer achieve the intended effect. This transition does not involve confrontation or assertion. It is quiet. The absence of reaction communicates more clearly than resistance ever could. The individual responds by choice rather than compulsion. Emotional sovereignty replaces emotional compliance. Another critical shift occurs when negotiation with suffering ends. Many prolonged struggles are sustained by internal bargaining. People attempt to justify pain, extract meaning prematurely, or tolerate situations in the hope of transformation. This negotiation keeps the experience active. When observation replaces bargaining, leverage disappears. Pain functions effectively only when confusion or self-betrayal is present. When internal alignment replaces internal conflict, the experience loses traction. This does not mean challenges disappear. It means challenges no longer define identity. The individual listens to internal signals with clarity rather than debating them. Boundaries become instinctive rather than enforced. As a result, attempts to reintroduce old dynamics fail. There is no opening for manipulation, guilt, or destabilization. The internal system no longer recognizes those tactics as valid inputs. This stage is often mistaken for emotional detachment, but it is more accurately described as emotional authority. The individual remains responsive without being reactive. Awareness replaces defensiveness. Another consequence of this shift is immunity to familiar emotional triggers. Words and actions that once caused doubt or distress no longer land. This is not because they have changed, but because the internal framework that processed them has evolved. Influence requires recognition. When recognition is withdrawn, influence collapses. This applies to relationships, environments, and internal narratives alike. Pain, when understood accurately, is not permanent. It is situational and instructional. Once its purpose is fulfilled, it disengages. It does not linger to prove a point. Completion rarely involves external validation. Apologies, acknowledgments, or explanations are not required. The system closes internally. Tension dissipates. Attention shifts elsewhere. To this point, the individual transitions from survival to sovereignty. Survival is reactive and conditional. Sovereignty is stable and internally governed. The shift is irreversible because it is structural. This is where Part 1 concludes. The foundation of closure has been established, not through endurance, but through integration. What follows next is not recovery, but responsibility. Not relief, but recalibration at a higher level. What follows after internal closure is not celebration or rest, but a subtle restructuring of how you engage with the world. Once a chapter is truly ended, the mind no longer returns to it for reference. Decisions are no longer filtered through past wounds, and reactions are no longer shaped by anticipation of repetition. This creates a noticeable shift in orientation. You begin responding to present conditions as they are, not as echoes of what they once resembled. This is where responsibility replaces recovery. Many people assume that once a difficult phase ends, ease automatically follows. In reality, what follows is clarity, and clarity demands accountability. When confusion disappears, excuses lose relevance. You are no longer operating from uncertainty, so choices carry greater weight. The internal system now expects consistency between awareness and action. This phase often exposes misalignments that were previously tolerated. When survival was the priority, compromises felt necessary. Once stability is restored, those compromises become visible. You notice where your time is misallocated, where your energy is drained without return, and where your presence is given out of habit rather than intention. These realizations are not accompanied by guilt, but by decisiveness. The absence of emotional noise creates space for accurate perception. You begin seeing patterns without personalization. Instead of asking why something is happening to you, you recognize how it functions and whether it belongs in your life. This shift from emotional interpretation to structural assessment changes everything. You no longer seek meaning in discomfort. You assess compatibility. This is also where many relationships change form or dissolve entirely, not through conflict, but through irrelevance. When you no longer require validation, explanation, or reassurance, dynamics based on those needs lose their foundation. Conversations shorten. Interactions simplify. Some connections fade without closure conversations, because closure has already occurred internally. This can be unsettling at first, especially for individuals conditioned to equate intensity with importance. Calm interactions may feel empty compared to emotionally charged ones. However, intensity is not depth. Stability is not boredom. The nervous system often confuses peace with lack of stimulation because it has adapted to stress as a baseline. Relearning neutrality takes time. As this recalibration continues, your tolerance for misalignment decreases. Situations that once felt manageable now feel intrusive. This is not sensitivity. It is accuracy. When internal clarity increases, friction becomes more noticeable. You are no longer willing to negotiate against your own awareness. This is where boundaries shift from being rules to being reflexes. You no longer deliberate extensively before disengaging from what does not align. The decision happens quickly and quietly. There is no need for justification because the internal system recognizes the signal immediately. One of the most misunderstood aspects of this phase is its quiet nature. From the outside, it may appear as withdrawal or passivity. Internally, it is anything but. There is constant assessment, refinement, and alignment occurring beneath the surface. The absence of visible struggle does not indicate stagnation. It indicates efficiency. At this point, your energy becomes more concentrated. You are no longer dispersing attention across unresolved issues. This concentration increases impact. Actions require less effort but produce clearer outcomes. This is not because circumstances have changed, but because internal resistance has decreased. You may also notice a reduced desire to explain yourself. When alignment is internal, explanation feels unnecessary. Those who resonate will understand through observation. Those who do not are no longer your responsibility to convince. This is a significant shift from external validation to internal confirmation. Another consequence of this phase is the disappearance of urgency. When clarity replaces fear, decisions are no longer rushed. Timing becomes intuitive rather than reactive. You act when alignment is present, not when pressure demands movement. This creates a different relationship with time. Time, in this state, feels less adversarial. You are no longer racing against imagined deadlines or compensating for past delays. Progress becomes deliberate. This does not mean slower. It means intentional. Each step serves a purpose rather than filling space. This is also where discernment sharpens. You become more selective, not only with people, but with information, commitments, and goals. You recognize that attention is a finite resource. What you engage with shapes your internal environment. Protecting that environment becomes non-negotiable. As discernment increases, so does confidence, though not in a performative way. Confidence here is quiet and grounded. It does not require affirmation. It is expressed through consistency. You trust your assessments because they are no longer distorted by unresolved emotion. This trust extends inward as well. Self-doubt decreases because decisions are no longer made from fragmented perspectives. When internal alignment exists, conflicting impulses diminish. You are no longer torn between what you know and what you fear. However, this phase also requires restraint. With increased clarity comes increased influence. Others may respond differently to your presence. Some may project expectations, seek guidance, or attempt to reinsert old dynamics. This is where discernment is critical. Not every request deserves access. The temptation to overextend can reappear in subtler forms. Instead of rescuing, you may feel compelled to advise. Instead of tolerating dysfunction, you may feel obligated to explain your boundaries. Both dilute alignment. Silence and consistency communicate more effectively than elaboration. At this stage, the work is not about expansion, but stabilization. You are integrating a new internal structure into daily life. This requires repetition, not intensity. Small, consistent actions reinforce the new baseline. Over time, this baseline becomes default. As this stabilization occurs, you may notice a shift in the types of challenges you encounter. They become less emotionally charged and more strategic. Instead of testing endurance, they test judgment. Instead of draining energy, they require precision. This is a sign of progression. Challenges evolve as internal capacity increases. The absence of old struggles does not mean the absence of growth. It means growth is now occurring at a different level. You may also experience moments of isolation during this phase. Not because you are alone, but because you no longer resonate with environments built on constant stimulation or conflict. This isolation is temporary. It creates space for alignment-based connections to emerge. These connections are different. They are not formed through shared struggle, but shared clarity. Interaction feels efficient rather than draining. Mutual respect replaces emotional dependency. Communication is direct and grounded. As these new dynamics form, it becomes clear why returning to the old chapter is impossible. The internal conditions that sustained it no longer exist. Even if external circumstances were recreated, the experience would not replicate. The system has changed. This is why attempts to revisit the past often feel hollow. Nostalgia lacks emotional depth because the internal framework that gave it meaning has dissolved. This is not loss. It is evolution. The past served its function. At this point, progress becomes less about achievement and more about maintenance. You are not striving to become something new. You are sustaining what you have integrated. This requires awareness, not effort. Discipline in this phase is subtle. It involves noticing when alignment wavers and correcting gently. There is no need for harsh self-correction. Awareness itself is sufficient to recalibrate. This is also where intuition becomes more reliable. With fewer internal conflicts, signals are clearer. Decisions feel simpler because they are not filtered through unresolved emotion. Trusting this clarity reinforces it. The world responds differently as well. Opportunities that require stability rather than struggle begin to appear. These opportunities often feel understated. They do not announce themselves dramatically. They require recognition rather than pursuit. This is why many people miss them. They are conditioned to equate opportunity with urgency. In this phase, opportunity aligns with readiness. It arrives when internal conditions can sustain it. As Part 2 concludes, it becomes evident that the old chapter cannot be re-entered not because it is forbidden, but because it is obsolete. The internal architecture that once supported it has been dismantled and replaced. What remains is not emptiness, but structure. Not relief, but responsibility. Not freedom from challenge, but freedom from repetition. The next phase is not about healing what was broken, but about building from what is now stable. As stability settles into place, attention naturally shifts toward direction. When internal alignment becomes consistent, life no longer revolves around correcting what is wrong, but around deciding what is worth building. This distinction is subtle yet foundational. You are no longer asking how to fix yourself or your circumstances. You are asking where to invest, what to maintain, and what deserves continuity. Direction in this phase does not arrive as a sudden revelation. It forms through sustained observation. You begin noticing what holds your attention without effort, what remains engaging even without external reward, and what continues to feel relevant when novelty fades. These signals are quieter than ambition, but far more reliable. They indicate compatibility rather than desire. One of the defining features of this phase is reduced internal negotiation. Previously, decisions may have involved debate between fear and hope, obligation and instinct. Now, choices are informed by coherence. When something aligns, it feels settled. When it does not, resistance appears early and clearly. This reduces the need for prolonged deliberation. Consistency becomes the central requirement. Not consistency as repetition for its own sake, but consistency as alignment sustained over time. This is where many people underestimate the work involved. The absence of crisis does not mean the absence of responsibility. Maintaining clarity requires attention. It requires noticing when habits drift, when commitments expand beyond capacity, and when external demands attempt to reintroduce fragmentation. In this phase, growth is measured differently. Progress is no longer defined by visible milestones alone. It is defined by stability under pressure, by the ability to remain grounded when circumstances fluctuate. This is a quieter form of advancement, but it is far more durable. You may notice that motivation feels different now. It is no longer fueled by urgency or comparison. It arises from alignment. When effort supports something internally coherent, it feels sustainable. When it does not, even small tasks feel draining. This distinction becomes an important guide. As direction clarifies, long-term thinking naturally expands. You begin evaluating choices not only by immediate outcome, but by cumulative effect. What will this look like if repeated daily? What does this require me to become over time? These questions reflect maturity of perspective. This is also where discipline becomes integrated rather than imposed. Instead of forcing routines through willpower, structures are designed to support alignment. You choose systems that reduce friction rather than relying on motivation. This creates reliability without strain. The external world often responds positively to this shift, though not always immediately. People tend to trust those who move with consistency rather than intensity. Reliability communicates competence. Over time, this attracts opportunities that require steadiness rather than volatility. These opportunities often appear understated. They may not carry dramatic promise, but they offer continuity. They reward presence rather than performance. Recognizing their value requires patience. Those conditioned to seek rapid change may overlook them. As you engage with these opportunities, you may notice a further refinement of identity. Roles become clearer. Strengths are no longer generalized. They become specific. You understand not only what you can do, but where you are most effective. This specificity reduces wasted effort. With specificity comes limitation, and limitation is not a loss. It is focus. Choosing where not to invest becomes as important as choosing where to invest. This is where many people struggle, equating openness with possibility. In reality, selectivity creates depth. This phase often involves saying no more frequently, not out of avoidance, but out of respect for capacity. Each commitment is evaluated by its impact on alignment. Overextension is recognized as counterproductive rather than admirable. As capacity stabilizes, output becomes more consistent. Results accumulate gradually. This accumulation may feel unspectacular at first, but it compounds. Over time, small aligned actions produce significant change. You may also notice a shift in how success is perceived. External recognition becomes secondary to internal coherence. Approval is appreciated, but not required. This reduces reactivity to feedback. Criticism is assessed for relevance rather than absorbed emotionally. This does not mean detachment from outcome. It means proportion. Outcomes inform adjustment, not identity. When something works, it is noted and refined. When it does not, it is evaluated without self-judgment. Relationships also settle into a more stable configuration. Connections that remain are based on mutual respect rather than shared turmoil. Communication becomes clearer. Boundaries are maintained without explanation. This creates ease. New relationships formed in this phase tend to develop gradually. Trust is built through consistency rather than intensity. These connections may lack dramatic beginnings, but they endure. They support long-term direction rather than short-term relief. As life becomes less reactive, presence increases. Attention is no longer consumed by unresolved issues. This allows for deeper engagement with current experience. You are more available to what is happening now, not because you are forcing mindfulness, but because there is less internal noise. This presence enhances perception. You notice details previously overlooked. You respond more accurately to situations as they unfold. This accuracy reduces error. Decisions are made closer to reality rather than assumption. Over time, this creates a sense of quiet confidence. Not certainty about outcomes, but trust in process. You know that alignment will guide correction if deviation occurs. This trust reduces anxiety. It is important to recognize that this phase does not eliminate difficulty. Challenges still arise. However, they are contextualized differently. Instead of threatening identity or stability, they are integrated into progression. They require adjustment, not overhaul. This perspective prevents regression. When setbacks occur, they are addressed without collapsing into old patterns. Recovery is faster because the internal structure remains intact. As direction solidifies, you may experience periods of apparent stillness. Progress may feel slow. This is often misinterpreted as stagnation. In reality, consolidation is occurring. Foundations are being reinforced. This phase cannot be rushed without compromising durability. Patience here is not passive. It involves continued engagement without forcing outcome. You maintain alignment while allowing external conditions to respond. This balance is learned through experience. Eventually, momentum resumes naturally. When conditions align externally with internal readiness, movement accelerates without strain. This acceleration feels different from urgency. It is steady and controlled. By this point, the distinction between effort and ease becomes clearer. Effort is still required, but it is directed. Energy is not wasted resisting reality. This makes sustained contribution possible. Looking back, it becomes evident that earlier phases were necessary. Instability prompted awareness. Recovery created clarity. Stability allowed direction. Each phase built the conditions for the next. The final outcome is not a dramatic transformation, but a functional one. You operate with fewer contradictions. Life feels more navigable. Decisions align more consistently with values. This is not perfection, but coherence. From here forward, progress depends less on breakthrough moments and more on maintenance. Attention to alignment, respect for capacity, and consistency of action become the defining factors. This is the phase where growth becomes self-sustaining. You are no longer propelled by reaction or necessity, but by intention. Direction is no longer sought. It is lived. The work now is simple, though not easy. Continue choosing alignment over intensity, consistency over urgency, and structure over chaos. In doing so, the path ahead unfolds not through force, but through clarity maintained over time. If this final segment added clarity to your perspective, take a moment to let that understanding settle before moving on. Content like this is not designed for quick consumption or emotional reaction. It is meant to be absorbed, reflected on, and applied over time. The value is not only in what was said, but in what it helps you recognize within your own thinking and decision-making. If you find this type of grounded, analytical approach useful, consider subscribing to the channel. Not as a routine action, but as a deliberate choice to stay connected to content that prioritizes clarity, discernment, and long-term understanding over urgency or sensationalism. Each video here is developed to help you interpret experiences more accurately, respond rather than react, and maintain perspective in situations that often feel overwhelming. Engagement matters when it is intentional. If something in this message stood out to you, consider leaving a comment not for validation, but as a way to articulate what resonated or what shifted in your understanding. Writing thoughts down, even briefly, can help solidify insight and turn recognition into application. Thoughtful discussion also creates a space where others can gain perspective without pressure or judgment. If you know someone who may benefit from this message, sharing it can be a simple but meaningful gesture. Not to convince or persuade, but to offer information that allows others to reflect at their own pace. Often, clarity arrives not through advice, but through exposure to ideas that frame experiences differently. As you continue forward, remember that progress is rarely loud. Sustainable growth tends to be quiet, steady, and built through consistent choices rather than dramatic moments. Pay attention to what supports alignment in your life and be selective about what you allow to take up mental and emotional space. Not everything requires a response, and not every situation deserves your energy. This channel exists to support that mindset, one focused on coherence, self-respect, and informed awareness. If that approach aligns with how you want to move through life, staying connected here can serve as a useful reference point along the way. Thank you for taking the time to engage with this content. Your attention is valuable, and choosing where to invest it is an act of discernment in itself. Continue prioritizing clarity over noise, consistency over urgency, and understanding over reaction. The more those choices are practiced, the more naturally they shape your direction. If this message supported you in any way, subscribe, engage thoughtfully, and return when you need perspective rather than pressure. The work of alignment is ongoing, and every step taken with awareness strengthens the foundation you are building. Asterisk.